One question that I ask guests on these conversations is concerns the future of philosophy, and we're thinking about, for example, young people who might be curious about philosophy, learning a little bit about philosophy, and not sure where to go or what to do or how to think about the proper task of philosophy. And I ask my distinguished guests to speak to that person and tell them a little bit about what they hope for the future of philosophy, and how they would sort of encourage someone to embark on this trip.
Oh, good. Yes. I've thought a lot about this, really. And I think the key is that philosophy is about questions. If you don't know what the best questions to ask are, you're doing philosophy. Once you figure out a good question to ask and why it's a good question to ask, then you go and you try to answer that question, and you're doing history or astronomy or physics or biology or geology or engineering or something like that. But there are plenty of issues where we're just not sure if we're asking the right questions. That's where we're doing philosophy. And there aren't any boundaries. It's just it's a sort of shockingly open-ended, there's no rules except reason, but those rules are also controversial. So I think that every field of inquiry, whether it's literature or history or medicine or science, has at the cutting edge questions. Sometimes they're ethical questions, sometimes they're just where do we go from here questions that they've postponed answering. And so there's philosophy to be done at the cutting edge of every field. That's why philosophy is so much fun, is because we get to deal with the questions that stump the experts in those fields. The only way you can do that responsibly is you got to learn enough about the field so that you don't come in and just start bumbling around and misunderstanding what the project is. So my advice to young people who have that urge to be philosophers is you got to be a philosopher of something, and not just a philosopher of philosophy. Pick a field or two and learn enough about them. Be an interdisciplinary expert if you can. And then your services will be sought out because they know they haven't had time to figure these things out. I asked one of these questions to a brilliant young neuroscientist a few years ago in his lab in New Jersey. And he said to me, "Oh, Dan, I don't have time to think about that. I just have to run experiments all the time." So there are those questions. And another way of looking at it, though, too, is the reason you have to study the history of philosophy is that the history of philosophy can be viewed as the history of very, very, very smart people making mistakes, asking the wrong questions. And if you don't know that history, you're going to make those mistakes because they're very tempting.
Or you're going to miss their insights.
Absolutely. But I love to watch scientists who think, I don't need philosophy. And first they make Hume's mistakes, then they make Kant's mistakes, and then they make logical positivist mistakes. And eventually you can bring them around to see that they've made mistakes, and they say, well, then what is it? They said, no, you're doing philosophy.
Excellent. What are your hopes for them? What do you hope for the future of philosophy?
I think I may be optimistic. It's not by chance that I am a Leibnizian, because I am very optimistic. And even if I am old, I believe that philosophy will go on interesting young people. And maybe more today than some years ago. Because we now have this future that has a lot of problems faced to us, for instance, the environment problems and so on. We are surrounded by problems, and all these problems demand a critical view from the people who tries to face them. The propaganda, the ideology may be very big, but you need to think by your own mind, and that is very important. And philosophy is concerned with that. It helps you to think not only in one way, but in several ways, to see the same phenomena from other points of view. And I think it's very important. And I believe that the young generations will be much, much more interested in philosophy than the previous ones.
Very good. Very good. I hope you're right.
I hope so. I would advise young people to read one author, to read it deeply. And I even dare to advise them to read, for instance, Plato. It's impossible not to like Plato, not to be in love with Plato. Read the Protagoras, the dialogue Protagoras, and you will see how humanity began to discuss, how humanity began not only to receive ideas, but to speak among equals, and to formulate arguments and to give counter arguments. And that is very important. And you have that an example. Philosophy is born like that, like a huge discussion in an agora, in a place, in a garden. Sometimes it was a garden, but people were there, and they came from all over the places in the city, from other cities, even from other cities, just for the pleasure of discussing, for their own minds, and to learn more and more. I think that one of the characteristics of the philosopher is the love for learning, the love for learning, understanding, and to be lucid, to understand what is happening. And for that, we cannot go alone. We cannot go alone in that battle. We have to put ourselves in the shoulders of the giants. Otherwise, we don't see much. You have to mount up to the San Bernardo de Chartres, an old religious man in the medieval ages, said that magnificent statement. We have to put ourselves on the shoulders of the giants. Otherwise, we see not much. But if we have the courage, it is necessary courage for doing philosophy. If you have the courage of mounting up, then you begin to have the pleasure of seeing. And that is one of the biggest pleasures you can have. It's one of the biggest.
You want a pure philosophical advice to the young philosopher. In which case, I think I would say something like, try and learn, and I'm not sure I followed this advice. No one gave me this advice in my case. Try and learn as much rigor as possible for some years in order to then methodically take it apart and sort of explode some of that rigor. It's as if, you need the tools, but then instead of having the tools dictate to you, you should be able to start taking them apart.
Beautiful.
One thing that I'm quite keen on, and that's to me, philosophy, especially the philosophy that I do, but that's another story. But in general, philosophy is often seen as the lady in the canteen or in the underground doing a little bit of the dishes, not cleaning up, except the other things are more important, economic, science, politics, and so on. Then I remind those people that lady is called Cinderella. She's the real queen. She's the one who actually makes the whole thing working. And those who do not care about philosophy, they do that at their own risk and peril, completely, because they just walk through into problems, into life, like sleepwalking. And you might say, well, I'd rather be a sleepwalker. I'd rather not see it because life is a tragedy, and I'd rather be sort of numb throughout the process. You're very welcome. But that is a philosophical choice as well. And you cannot escape making at least that much of a philosophical choice. I shall be numb and sleepwalking through life for the rest of my years. You're welcome. I'm not going to do that, but at least we should both agree that there is no such thing as a non-philosophical life. There is one called bad philosophical life, or plenty. And so that's why we should be doing good philosophy.
Yeah, so my advice for a philosopher is don't do simply philosophy. I do believe that the best philosophy is always outward looking. And it's not simply outward looking towards the sciences. It could be outward looking toward policies. It could be outward looking toward political questions, toward political science. It could be outward looking toward aesthetics and the history of art. My sense is the best philosophy and the most interesting philosophy I've seen is, of course, very sophisticated from a philosophical point of view. So no one should neglect developing philosophical skills and drawing distinctions and giving examples and counterexamples. The bread and butter of being a philosopher. But I do think that philosophies as just inward looking get extremely dry and lack imagination, and in fact end up being a form of scholasticism that is of little interest, and in fact dies out after 5 to 10 years because people just get bored with that tradition. So my hope for philosophy is that, as I think is the case nowadays, maybe more than when you and I started doing philosophy, that philosophers are going to keep being outward oriented, either toward politics or science or mathematics or logic or the arts. And my advice to any budding philosopher, a young person who wanted to go into philosophy, would be just do many things at the same time. And if you're interested in the sciences or in logic or in math, just learn some science, learn some math, and learn some logic to a fairly advanced degree, because it's going to make you a better philosopher. That's my
really nice advice.
Hello, interested person in philosophy. I'm glad you're potentially watching. Yes, I think there are so many different routes into philosophy. So my personal route into philosophy is actually as an undergraduate. I did not major in philosophy. And I know now, actually, if you want to get to grad school now, you practically, and probably would agree with that. I mean, except very exceptionally, most people who go into grad school now are already philosophers with a philosophy major. But I think there are many, many different roads into philosophy, and mine was through archaeology and world art studies. So I have that as a major. But I got lots of, I took a lot of electives. There were Muslim philosophy, Indian philosophy, Chinese philosophy, and African philosophy. So those were sort of like, and that was really interesting. So my first serious introduction to philosophy were non-Western philosophical traditions. And that was, I think that has a continued influence in how I think about philosophy. I think it's very diverse sort of practice, even in the sort of fundamental way that people approach it. So we started this conversation by saying philosophy starts in wonder, but I think for some people it genuinely doesn't. Like they just have a bone to pick. So I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way. So for some people, philosophy is just argument, like, and the way they write papers and do philosophy is like, this person said that. what is that? How that is just wrong and terribly wrong. And I'm going to tell you how it is wrong. So that's one way of doing philosophy. The other way is like, wow, this is such a cool, weird thing. I want to learn more about it. So that's more like the wonder-based. Or you have people who like, they build big systems. So there's so many different ways of approaching philosophy. So I think when you start philosophy, it's good to start with an approach that you resonate with. Like, don't take something really difficult or something lots of difficulties getting into. It could be something that really resonates with you. Like, I was talking to my son's chess teacher, and he has read only 2 philosophy works, namely Ayn Rand's, what was it, Atlas Shrugged or something. I've never read it. So, and that's something by Nietzsche, I think. Thus spoke Zarathustra. And he really enjoys those 2 works. So I would say that I'm not a natural Nietzsche fan, but after many years, I slowly sort of got into Nietzsche, and I think I get a better understanding of what what his project is. And now I sort of resonate a bit with it in a way that I didn't before. But I think you shouldn't start with something that absolutely doesn't fit your temperament or something. And usually some philosophers are just easier to read than others. Like, say, Hannah Arendt is very accessible as a philosopher, but Kierkegaard probably not. Maybe, I don't know, maybe for some people. So you can just, like, one thing you could do is just watch podcasts. There are so many philosophy podcasts, and sort of see, like, prima facie, am I interested in that author? And then, just read something by them that is accessible, and then go from there.
Fantastic advice, Helen. Thank you.
I'll try to do this quickly since we don't have much time. But I think that it's important, if you're a philosopher, to first find out, what did the great philosophers think? To approach philosophy as if, well, I'm only interested in what's happened the past 10 years. I don't think you get a very good sense of what philosophy is or could be. So that I think looking at the history of philosophy gives you a feel. What people have tried to do is make sense of their reality in different realms, but in very important ways. And they've come up with insights. And each one of the great thinkers has a somewhat different insight, but you can learn from all of them. The second thing I'd like to say is that I would encourage at least those who have an interest in following, I hate to call it applied philosophy, but think, how can I make a difference in society? Well, I think you make a difference in society by trying to articulate some of the ideals and goals that philosophers have talked about, but that also the society needs, and in some ways inarticulately embraces. So the importance of going into medical ethics, engineering ethics, business ethics, is that you engage with society. And I think philosophers could do a lot more of engagement with society, and they can go off in their study and do the arcane work that we do, but it shouldn't end there. So that study of philosophy isn't just for you, your own personal edification. It isn't just for the profession, it should be for the greater society. And how you bring that, the important work that we do professionally, into the social realm, into the consciousness of people, is an important aspect that we pay too little attention to in our graduate programs, and that I think can be remedied and would help society as well as push forward the goals of philosophers.
So let me say 2 things. So
Great.
One, very concretely, I think my own feeling is, like, the best thing that I did as an aspiring philosopher was find groups of people to talk with about books. That is, as much as I love old dead books, they're also boring, and it can be really hard to motivate yourself and to be able to engage with them. But arguing with other people is, like, for me, like the recipe for how you can become engaged with them. So find other people who are doing the same thing and find ways to connect with them and have assignments. I think, you know, when I meet with my students, one of the things, I will meet with any student for any reason, but I like to have some reading, like to something to talk about. You know, over the course of the meeting, I find is much more productive if the student has written something or there's some text that we're talking about.
Great.
So in general, I believe in both those things. Find other people and have texts that you read. It can be a page, it can be short. More broadly, the future of philosophy. I have both sort of pessimism and optimism about the future of philosophy. So I have some pessimism about the direction that academic research in philosophy is going. It feels to me like every year there is more of it, but the percentage of it I want to read is shrinking.
Oh, that's a pity.
And so I think that somehow the system incentivizes very small moves in very abstruse areas that are increasingly just kind of pulling away from the center. And I'm worried about that situation, and I don't have any thoughts about how to help that situation. I feel like maybe it's going to just collapse at some point, kind of like how scholasticism did. It has a lot of resemblances to that sort of. So I'm worried about philosophy in that way, and I don't have thoughts. On the other hand, I'm incredibly optimistic when I just think about how much energy and interest there is for philosophy everywhere in the world at every level. I think it's unprecedented. I mean, the fact that there's a New York Times philosophy column, like when I was a teenager, I wouldn't have thought there could be such a thing, but there are all these podcasts that so many people want to talk to me, that people who are not academic philosophers are reading my book, that I have a public philosophy column. And my kind of really optimistic long-term thought is, like, I really think everyone should do philosophy, that should spend some time in their life doing philosophy. And maybe eventually we'll view it that way, like the way we view literacy now, right? Like it used to be that, like, most people weren't literate and that wasn't considered some kind of catastrophe. And now it's considered a catastrophe if someone isn't literate, right? And I think philosophy is like that. It has that kind of significance, and people are hungering for it. And what I'm sort of hoping is that we can take some of the energy that we're pouring into the research journal enterprise and kind of move it towards addressing this hunger and this interest in philosophy in a huge variety of ways. You know, it doesn't need to be one-on-one teaching. It can be podcasts, it can be writing of various kinds, etc. But I feel like, you know, if economists have taught us anything, they've taught us that this situation is going to rectify itself. Yeah.
Great. Fantastic, Agnes. That was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your time. And thanks to everyone for tuning in or for clicking. Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.